Welcome, everyone. This is a lesson on Europe's expanding empires, and we're going to be talking today about the lesson which is really about, well, European states or empires. We're thinking about kingdoms that have international dimensions to them, such as Spain or France or the British Isles, the British monarchy, and several others as well, but those are among the chief ones. So we are building really, in effect, on a lot of the lessons, materials that we learned from the first module about Europe's traditional power structures, challenges to it, and its expansion internally through agricultural and other kinds of economic revolutions.
Right.
But Europe was a dynamic, messy, really strong place in many ways for all the conflicts that were taking place among Europeans, both between different countries like France and England, and within various countries like England, as we saw with the conflicts around the English Civil Wars. There's still a lot of energy that is partly expressed in outward expansion. And so, in particular, what can we say about this expansion of Europe's economies and its states in the early modern period that's worth pointing out for this lesson?
Well, there's all kinds of things we can talk about here. One thing we should acknowledge at the beginning, we don't spend a lot of time in this module or in this lesson in particular talking about technology, but there is a technological dimension of this story. 200 years before the period we're talking about, Europeans can't go to the Americas. They can't go to Africa. Now they can.
Except they could go to Africa, but through the long land routes that are very difficult.
And they didn't do that. North African traders did it by extension for them. They could certainly go into North Africa, for sure, but they couldn't go into tropical Africa. They couldn't go into Southern Africa. They couldn't go beyond the Sahara. So now they can. Now they can sail down the African coast. Now they can sail out into the Atlantic.
And by now we're talking 15th and 16th,
16th
century.
Exactly. So that's a big part of the story. But so you've got that expansion within Europe. But now it's being enabled and facilitated to go even further by the technological developments of superior shipping and navigation abilities. That's really something important there. There's some simple questions that we can ask here, though. You mentioned the major states. You talked about Britain. Actually, Britain doesn't exist yet. We should note that. It's England, Scotland, Ireland, and Wales. Wales has been merged into England.
And there's the United Monarchies, however, which is a complex and difficult kind. It's something like a yes.
We don't need to get into that, but certainly
there's lots
of things. Lots of things are changing here, though. So we've got Spain, we've got Portugal. They're the ones certainly heading into South America and into Africa. They're going to pioneer that slave trade. The French and the British will not be far behind. But we're seeing that broad movement out into the Atlantic Ocean. But the terminology we've been using here is, in fact, many ways a misleading terminology. We're talking about England going across and France going across. So. And really, when we look at these stories, we see that it's not so much those states that are the actors as individual merchants, kind of adventurer figures. They are people who see trade opportunities, see opportunities to get rich, and they're looking for opportunities in trade to do that. So many of the people that are going into the slave trade, they're not imagining exploring Africa. They're not imagining broadening Portugal's empire. They're imagining a good load of pay at the end of a journey where they can get quite rich quite fast. Certainly, that explains a lot of the early explorers into the Americas as well. But when we were looking at our documents this week, we can see some of those complexities. We can see different motivations. We can see different people pursuing different ends, different aims, and all of them acting kind of in concert because they're all exploring these new areas, but not necessarily working together. In fact, in many ways, competing against each other. Many of these early stories are stories of somebody setting up a trading post, and the next year there's a war between two traders, and that trading post gets destroyed, and the men get killed, and they move on to someplace else. It's a messy, complex story, and we need to remember who's actually doing it here. And our documents this week are very good at getting at that. They need to, one important dimension of this is they need state support.
These adventurers.
Yes, exactly. They need the permission of the king. They need the permission of the state to do these things. They need to outfit, they need to raise money, they need to do things on the home front, and that's why they need the permission. And then when they get there, they're acting in the king's name, they're acting in the queen's name, but they are not, in fact, the state. They are acting on behalf of the state. And they're really the leading figures here.
So that is one of many complexities. is it a good time to highlight the big question?
I think that's exactly
Yeah,
right.
so when we're looking at these complexities, we have to pay attention to the sources. This
Yes.
connects with the experience everyone has already from Module 1, looking at primary evidence. And particularly this week, the thing that would really be important to practice, in particular when looking at these primary sources of early European expansion, is to look at the perspectives of the various authors of these sources. So what motivated these men? And they're men.
Oh, yeah. There are a few women in these stories, but not many.
And that's one thing to pay attention to, because we do look at the relationships between men and women's perspectives in other lessons. But in this lesson, look at the authors who are writing these documents. Try to understand, when you source the document, one of the historical thinking skills, who wrote this text, when, and for what reasons. And then you can start to understand, try to unravel the motivations, the reasons behind their actions, at least in a particular time and place. They might have complex motivations. That's another thing to pay attention to. And motivations can also be changing for the same groups of people or even individuals. But as much as you can, use these particular documents as windows into a different world and as tools for trying to answer this question about motivation.
I was just going to say that we're really focusing on economic questions this week. This is, I think you'll see the motivation, to give a big hint here, it's primarily economic.
But that can be also... Go ahead.
But that can be political, that can be cultural too. We're going to see there's a strong cultural dimension to how they frame their arguments. And we should certainly be alert to that.
Yeah, we've seen this in past weeks too. The religious isn't necessarily only religious. It can also have profound political implications.
Precisely.
So these categories that we use to make sense of past worlds, economic and cultural and political reasons or motivations, you really have to get beyond those to really
Sometimes
understand.
they obscure what's going on.
So we shouldn't just use those categories. They're only starting points. We're really talking about the specifics. And the specifics, how do you understand those? Well, that's quite straightforward when you focus on sources, because they have all the resources that historians really need for trying to answer this question about motivations. There's no other way that we can understand this.
So I think if this week we look for patterns and at the same time try to be attentive to differences. Where do we see commonalities? Where do we see distinctive features? And I think that would be a useful set of guides for us to think about these people's motivations in general.
Yeah, so looking at what is unique about one document would be easier when looking at comparing the one document with other documents.
And turning finally to our toolbox, you've been talking about perspective, and that's really where we're going to focus this week in the toolbox.
Yes, so you can look at the resources there that will help you think more deeply about this dimension of historical thinking, and then apply the skills of thinking about perspective and understanding different motivations to your analysis of these sources, so that we can really deal with the question of understanding European expansion while not getting lost in generalities.
I think that will really help us think about both the big patterns, but at the same time recognizing that there's real limits to only understanding that as a big pattern, that there's other things going on as well. And we're going to see that continually through the course.
And in any other history course you take, and in most other studies in university probably. I think that's a good place to stop.
I think so too.
Okay.
Nice tie, by the way.
Thank you.